please. Moved by Lorraine, seconded by Courtney. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Adoption of the minutes from September 29th meeting. I hope everyone had a chance to review the minutes. Need a motion for adoption. Looking, oh, sorry. Vicky and Courtney, all in favor? Thank you. And I'll ask for disclosure of monetary interest. I assume there is none today. We have no delegations. We may be a little bit tight for time today, so we'll move right into our priority issues. First issue, parking. Vicky, you had asked that this be put on the agenda. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, so I will start with my apartment building that I currently live in does not come with any parking spaces. I wrote down what I wanted to say. So I said, I feel like we need to reopen the discussion on parking. In the past, I've been approached by multiple tenants in an apartment building in town asking where they can park. In a panic, sometimes because they had been towed due to snow removal. I'm now experiencing this again in another apartment building in town. I'm also personally experiencing what lack of parking can do, as I've had to park on the road, as have other tenants, and have received a parking ticket, parking in excess of 2 hours on the same block, a $20 to $25 fine. I also have had a hit and run happen to my car parked on the same street. I open the floor for discussion, acknowledging I am one story of many and must disclose different problems that the renters face.
Thanks, Vicky. So we've had like numerous discussions regarding parking and primarily related to reduction in parking requirements for new development to try and make it easier for developers to build and trying to help accommodate people as well as possible. So your item today, Vicky, is I guess a bit contrary to that, because we also have a lot of current units in town that were, I guess, developed either prior to a parking bylaw requirement or somewhere along the way where they were developed and parking was not provided. And Carl isn't on here yet, I don't believe, is he?
Nope, he's coming.
Okay. So to that effect, I mean, there's a number of units in town which are grandfathered. And I guess the challenge a tenant faces if they elect to rent in one of those units is if there is no parking, those are challenges. So what is the opportunity for us, I guess, to create off-street parking that could be a remedy to this issue? So Carrie, can you provide some, we made some changes recently to our municipal lot permitting longer term like monthly rental rates, as well as making some changes so we could ensure that people would have overnight parking there even through the winter. Yeah. Correct?
Yep. So we did. And I think that was part of the work from our recommendations from the task force this was discussed there as well. So we've made some changes to the municipal lot, which is on Market and William. So right now we're selling monthly permits, and as well for the winter, we've got, I forget how many spots, I don't know off the top of my head, but we're accommodating for overnight parking there now as well. So anybody who wishes to park there overnight, we have to have an agreement in place simply because we need to ensure that those vehicles are moved by a certain time in the morning for snow clearing operations. So we're going to see how successful that is, see what the uptake is on the number of people who request it. And from there, we'll decide whether we can allocate any more parking in that lot for overnight or whether we can, maybe open it up to more weekly or monthly permits. So this is our first time doing an overnight lot. So it's been, we're juggling a bit with Public Works because we want to ensure that we're not impeding their snow clearing operations. But so we are offering that. And we've actually, I think there was an advertisement out this week about the overnight. So that's the only lot we've got right now where we offer that, but it's we're going to see how successful it is.
It won't work for me for a multitude of reasons. Number one, the timing, also the location, not just because I'm like, I do have an issue of walking where I'm missing a femur in one of my legs. So walking that far from my house to my car would not be really realistic. At the same time, it's right across the street from my abuser, so there's no chance I can use this. There needs to be other options, I believe.
Well, we did complete a downtown parking study that came forward, I don't care, it was last year or the year before last year, I believe.
We've done two, yeah, the preliminary one was 2 years ago, and then late 2019 or early 2020, we had the second parking, or the finality of that for the second parking study.
So it did speak to what we believe was, I guess, adequate supply. Does not mean there are exceptions, as Vicky has referenced here. And through that study, do you recall if we have an inventory of privately owned parking?
There is some privately owned lots, but they are mostly in the downtown. And I don't know if they accommodate overnight parking or not. I know they have daytime, and the one that's popping into my head is Rivington's on Main. But they're few and far between the private lots that we know of that allow for public to park there.
So
that would be a lot more better for me.
Yes, so maybe if there's a method of providing an inventory of potential parking places in town that tenants could check on our website and be able to go get contact information for those owners and eventually reach out. It's only one suggestion that may make a difference here. I don't see it with any method where we could go back and force parking requirements on landlords that already have these units in use. Obviously we can't just tell them they can't put people in the apartments if there isn't a parking spot for them. That's not practical.
In the meantime, what do I do? Because I can't keep accommodating these parking tickets, and I don't know where to fly my car to get it out of the way.
So maybe on a one-off, Vicky, we can, you and I can chat, or you and Carrie can chat, and we can see about potential solutions we may be aware of. On a broader issue, I think you speak to the might be needs to go beyond yourself and other people who may be in similar situations. So I say maybe an inventory of what's available might help with that. Any of your thoughts or comments here? Lorraine?
It's not really a thought, it's maybe a question too. So it's my understanding that when we build new apartments or when we do additional apartments in something we own, we have to provide a parking space for every unit. Is that correct?
Correct. And Carl, do you want to speak to that?
But what you're implying, I guess, Sean, is that if it's a building that's already, it's already been made into small apartments or apartments, they're not required to provide a parking spot for their tenants. Is that correct?
Yes. So I was grandfather would be like just from that expression. Units have been in use for a long period of time, either before we had parking requirements or somehow they were in place without having a parking requirement. But Carl, can you speak further to this?
Yes, that's absolutely true. Our zoning bylaw does require a certain number of parking spaces when we're dealing with a new residential build, but we've had situations where there were apartments that had no parking associated with it, where they were renovating, and so long as the renovation doesn't increase the number of units or otherwise increase the occupancy, then we'd have to accept it as grandfathered through zoning review. So the parking requirements really kick in when we have a new or expanded requirement, and I think that's one of the challenges that our zoning team is our zoning review team is looking at. We have the same parking requirements for a bachelor apartment compared to a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment. There's still that same 1.25 space requirements. But yes, we don't, from a planning perspective, we don't track existing long-standing residences downtown, who has parking, who doesn't have parking, or if they change hands or rent. We just don't have a way to administer that, unfortunately.
Thanks, Carl. Any further on parking before we move on with the 2022 budget? Yeah. Carrie?
Just, I don't know, Vicky, but have you maybe talked to some of your neighbors to see if they have a spot that you could?
No, they're all receiving parking tickets on the street too. They're in the same situation. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Oh,
And this is
there's
just
no-
one
no-
street and one building in town, and it's happening all over our downtown, as we know. If I'm aware of it, I know you guys are. And just to be told that there's basically nothing we can do except maybe provide some lots. Like, I mean, affordability wise too, like, it's just baffling. It's really frustrating to me. But anyway, we can move on to other issues and we can discuss this at a later date, because I know that this is a pretty pressing meeting.
Well, and Vicky, rather than getting into specifics of individuals and addresses and stuff like that, I think it's better we do that offline. So 2022 budget. So we had committee the whole Monday night. And so I had advised committee of our task force recommendation that the town provide 2% of tax revenue towards affordable housing, specifically to our affordable housing. It wasn't supported Monday evening, I think largely due to really a lack of specifics. In other words, how would this be utilized? There was no real plan attached to it. So we definitely need to ensure that this comes back to committee and that we have a recommendation as to what we believe is appropriate and fair, but we probably need some parameters around it. Now, 2022 budget will be coming to committee of the whole on November 22nd, I believe, for the first discussion.
Yeah.
So we are somewhat pressed to try to get something up for discussion again. So I just wanted to open it up today, advise the committee today of the outcome of that suggestion, but to have a broader discussion on what we can do. And Carl, I might turn to you. I don't know if you've had any chance to see what other affordable housing CIPs have done for funding. And I guess we need to build a framework to determine a suitable request to council for funding for 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so we are working on the RFP for the affordable housing CIP as directed by council. I think as far as the specific programs that we would have with it, it's a little early to be forecasting a recommended approach, because we don't know at this point whether we would get our best bang for our buck in terms of creating affordable units through, say, a tax abatement that has a different budgetary impact than say a grant or a loan to support individual confirmation. So unfortunately, we don't have the information yet to be able to ballpark what that might look like.
Okay, so Carl, timelines based on the regulatory requirements, based on getting a CIP drafted and supported and approved, realistically, how far into the year will we be before we could actually have an active affordable housing CIP?
So what we're hoping for at this point is getting the RFP launched within the next, certainly later this fall, and hopefully have a consultant selected by the end of the year. So the statutory timelines require a public open house and a process similar to if we were adopting an official plan. That being said, I think I would expect that we may go above and beyond what the Planning Act requires for the adoption of a CIP and reach out to and consult with the community and find out really whoever we pick to do this has probably done similar projects in other municipalities, but may not know our community too well. So they're going to have to familiarize themselves with Smith Falls and what our individual needs are. So that's going to inevitably take a few months. So we may have it available sort of, and I don't want to overpromise, but it may be sort of an optimistic scenario might be towards the end of the second quarter of of 2022 could be a target, and hopefully that aligns well with the review and update of the downtown CIP that we already have. We're assuming that that process that they can happen collaboratively and efficiently together.
So understanding it's mid-year probably before we have an affordable housing CIP, and at that point in time we promote it, we encourage developers and homeowners and whoever else may be able to seek support from the CIP. Realistically, we're talking less than 6 months for people to take advantage of it. Not to mention, if there's things already in the works of that stage, it's easier. But if someone hasn't even started considering a project at the stage, we're quite a ways off before they reach a point when they would seek funding from a CIP. So I guess from that perspective, the amount of money needed probably in 2022 would reasonably be lower, obviously, than it had been there for a full year. So it's as Carl has said, it's difficult to pinpoint an exact number. But we would also like the whole council to consider a number and some form of support. So I'll open the floor for discussion. Vicky, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I got to watch the council meeting. Not too thrilled, but what can we do? The thing I noticed in the council meeting that it was not mentioned that anything about there being rent subsidies at all. Maybe I missed it. And then we got a handout kind of detailing what the CIP would be. And I missed again where the rent supplements would be. So I'm really concerned that if we go forward and don't have that in there, that this is not going to be included. And I really want it to be.
Okay. Thank you, and we can discuss that further. So I don't, and Kira, you may have the minutes in front of you. I don't believe we had a recommendation to implement a program for rent subsidies, and the county.
If I'm wrong, the last meeting we had, you said that rent subsidies would be a good idea after I gave the presentation and you consulted the nonprofits.
Well, I think we said it could be a good idea, but we haven't actually made any recommendation to committee of the whole for that.
I thought it was going to be included in the CIP. That's what was discussed at the last meeting. That's why I'm confused why it wasn't included.
Yeah. Carl, could you clarify? But I don't think that's something that would be that would meet the statutory requirements of a CIP. Today, the rent supplements come from provincial funding to housing providers, obviously Leonard County Housing in this situation. So Carl, can you add 30?
That's my understanding. I haven't seen it in another CIP. I can't confirm that doesn't meet the statutory, that doesn't qualify as an option or as a funding option under a community improvement plan. I'd be happy to explore that with our team. Just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it can't happen, but I definitely cannot commit to that anyway. My understanding is this is the same as yours, that it would probably be something coming from a different level of government, but I'm happy to be corrected on that.
So what was the understanding of the rent bank? What's that going to be implemented on?
So I know we discussed the rent bank, but I don't think we had any action from that.
I thought you were saying that the tax portions from tax money would go towards funding it, or is that just for the CIP?
The CIP would be funded to create affordable spaces. A rent bank would be a whole other subject. I believe it would be outside the CIP, and it's something that we would, if we were going to consider it, it would be something we provide dollars to the county. The Leonard County Housing has That's
what I've been asking for from the beginning. I said that at the beginning, like 2 meetings ago, that we should be getting money, giving it to social services and having them distribute it that way. And then we further discussed it and opened up the floor to this. Forgive my confusion, but I seem to be missing, like, did I dream this meeting?
Let's say I know we discussed it, but Joanne, you want to go ahead?
I know what she's referring to. I was at that meeting as well. And it was a proposal that was, because we're talking about people being lodged in hotels and that the county was getting low on money. And pretty soon they wouldn't be able to support anybody into hotels. And it was just a discussion that maybe we could take a portion of the taxes. But you were going to also maybe talk to the other mayors, like for Carleton Place and Perth, so that there could be an agreement so that we could be supporting the housing, the county housing. So that because if we took some from Smith Falls and put it to the county, then it doesn't guarantee that the money would be in Smith Falls. It would be distributed throughout the county. But it was also an opening for a discussion with the other mayors and the other communities to see if that was something that could be of support for our county, because we don't have the money coming in from the province. That was my understanding.
Okay.
I don't think that it was that Smith Falls was committing to that, but it was to open a discussion so that we could be supportive, so that the whole county could have a little bit of money from every community that it serves. That was my understanding, but I may.
Well, and yeah, that's sounds more familiar, that we were going to ask to see what could be done at the county. I think what we probably, the outcome today, I think we need understanding from our county housing as to where their funding is in relationship to where the demand is, and is there gaps? And I suspect there probably are. They do run out of money potentially at some point in time during the year, but we can investigate that. Allie, I'd like to hear from you next.
Hi. Yeah, just in regards to the rent supplements within the CIP, you know, I don't know if they're specifically entitled rent supplements, but I do know there's other counties and other, you know, communities who have done a CIP for affordable housing, and then also called it affordable housing and housing initiatives, in which they look at ways to have purpose-built housing, and then looking at rent supplements kind of under that. I don't know if that's the way we would want to go. I do agree with Vicki. It is something that needs to be considered, because at this point we can't rely on, you know, greater funding from, you know, federally and provincially, because that just hasn't been working. So if that's something we can take into consideration, Carl, when we're, you know, drafting the proposal, or when we're looking at for the consultation, in regards to going forwards. It's just a thought.
Right, thank you. So Carl, Adriana, I'll come back to you in a moment. Like, that's something you can investigate. If there, and Ellie, if you have examples, certainly circulate them to us, including Carl.
Yes,
I mean, look
please.
further into it to see if that's something that can be leveraged through a CIP, or would be something that would be done through the county. I mean, the county ultimately, like any upper tier or large single tier, has the autonomy to provide additional funding to rent supports, variety of programs, over and above what money they receive from the province. But it's up to county council to do that. Councillor McKenna and I both sit on community services, which does oversee the housing authority. But ultimately, we don't have a vote on county council. It's all the municipalities across the county which determine that. So not saying it's not a possibility, but I think we really need to be able to understand that there's a significant gap between the money available today and the demand for the dollars today. And we can investigate that. Vicki?
I just called this morning out of a whim, just for fun, for examples of what the hotels around our area cost per month. So I called them asking for November 1st to December 1st date for a room with a single bed, didn't matter the size. So the first one I called was Rogers Motel. They quoted me as $75 a day plus tax. They do not do monthly. They do not do weekly. It equals $2,325 a month. Second, I called Best Inn. They gave me a discount because they only had a 2-bedroom available for that month, and I was only one person staying in it. So they gave me $80 plus tax, no monthly or weekly discount, or no monthly or weekly rates, $2,480. Econo Lodge, same thing, no monthly or weekly rates, $109 plus tax, which equals $3,379. And fourth, I called Best Western. They have no weekly or monthly rates. Their range is 138 plus tax, which equals $4,278. Fifth, I called the Rito Hotel. They claim they are no longer a hotel. They told me that they don't have a price to give me. It depends on the day. They directed me to booking on sites such as booking.com or Airbnb, and they were lost as to any amount they could possibly give me. But they did say they do have private apartments.
Yes. So if you go back a year ago, you're going through last winter, the county did pay to put numerous people, I think probably up to 30 or 40 rooms at a time that were being paid for from social service relief funding from the province due to the pandemic. So to Vicky's point, huge cost. And I mean, what would it would cost that somebody in a hotel for a month would probably provide rent supports for 10 people for a month. Now that was temporary funding that has been discontinued. So the county does have ongoing funding from the province to provide a variety of rent supports. But like I said, the question I think is, are they fully subscribed? Is there a shortfall? Is there a need for that number to be larger? And we will investigate that. We will go to the housing staff, get some understanding.
The problem is okay, you end up homeless. So you end up in a hotel. Your HOP fund covers you maybe 3 days, about that, depending on where you stay. And then if you are in there, you've used up your HOP, which is usually your first or last month's rent. You then need to go to social assistance. Social assistance, to my knowledge, does not accept a hotel as an address. I could be wrong. I'm not sure. That's where we do need to go to the source about this. But then they won't give you a check. You only get what's called street allowance, which is a couple $100 at best. This is why the rent supplements are so important. Not only to keep people housed, but to get people housed and not cost the county. Like, I know that program ran out, but I'm not just speaking to that. I'm speaking to everything.
Well, yeah. So the county council, we have a county council budget meeting later in November as well. So if we get some understanding, I can raise it at that budget meeting that we need to be doing something. Well, Ellie, and then Joanne.
Yeah, I can just kind of touch on that a little bit. So from my understanding and my experience, I mean, one, to Vicky's point, I think that's been the frustration of the frontline workers for the past 2 years, is there hasn't been any proactive support in regards to getting people housed. It's strictly been a Band-Aid, putting them in a hotel and then kind of leaving them, and not offering those outreach supports or any kind of housing supports really in general. And then, but with that being said, from my experience right now, because we have had that COVID relief funding, individuals haven't had to been using their HOPS fund. They have been using just the COVID relief money that's been provided. So the county has been putting them up without making them use their HOPS funding. So that when they do find housing, if they do find housing, they still have access to that. I do also believe that the HOPS funding has just increased up to $1,500 a year. That's like a very new increase, like I'm going to say within the last couple days. Again, though, we don't know how long that's going to last. It kind of varies per year from 500 to 1,500 is the highest I've seen it for the HOPS funding. And then just back to the rent supplements, I think the county is fully aware that the COHB or any kind of the rent supplements aren't sufficient, because I think they became available in April and there was a wait list by June. So in regards to rent supplements, like the county just genuinely needs to do more on that aspect. I guess I'm wondering is that something we as a housing task force for Smiths Falls are wanting to take on to help our specific community members, or is that something that we're wanting to go broader with and take it to the county as a whole?
Well, it's a great question, Ellie, and that's something that I think we need better understanding of. If we're going to make a case that either our county and or Lanark County Council, which of course representatives from across the county, a lot of them in rural areas, are going to provide more money for some form of rent support or supplement, then it's got to be evidence-based. And we need to be able to demonstrate that there is a significant gap between the funding and the needs. So we need to provide that clarity. So as I mentioned, we can go to Leonard County housing staff and we can get some details, not just on what's happened this year and over the last year, but where the trends are going, because COVID was a different period of time. And the funding that was there made a significant difference, but we know that won't be there in the future. Joanne?
Well, I was just going to say what Ellie said, is that if we are not going to be addressing it as a county, is there a way that the town could look at supporting their own family? Because if you look demographically, we have a high Ontario Works recipient in our community. And market rents are absolutely crazy. So is there something that maybe the town could look, if we can't do it as a committee or as a county, if we can address it as a town and say, you know, like you had maybe suggested, maybe through the taxes and having some sort of a bank where we could, or even talk to some of the landlords, you know, like, is there a way that we can subsidize some of the families that are renting from you? I'm also wondering too, like, just walking around and looking at different housing and apartment buildings. Are the buildings, like, I know the rents have gone up, but do they justify having a $1,500 or $1,200 rent increase? Like, are the properties well maintained? And that would be something like the building inspector would have to, you know, like, sort of get involved and see, you know, like, if they're going to be increasing their rents and, you know, like, the property is really not worth, if you're comparing like from an Ottawa to a Smiths Falls, but in Smiths Falls, it's a rundown building, you can't really justify increasing your rents. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I don't disagree. Unfortunately, it's a market forces and the demand and limited supply, which is, I think, giving some landlords the opportunity to significantly increase the rent, maybe even for places that hard to justify that rent, but it's the reality we're in. Ellie?
I just want to say, I think we just want to be careful when we're comparing to Ottawa, because I would say you're going to find the same issues in Ottawa that you're finding here. You're still going to find fridges and stoves not working. You're still going to find cockroaches, and you're really still going to find unjustifiable rents. So I don't think it's something that I think it's just something we should be aware of. We don't want to necessarily compare ourselves to Ottawa, because we'll find the same thing, and it's not going to kind of address the harm that's being caused here in Smiths Falls. I think if we're going to do it, we need to look at it kind of locally and compare it, because the rents are unjustifiable in most cases. Landlords do need to make a profit, right? At the end of the day, they are a business, they are entrepreneurs, but looking at how we can ensure that they are following those codes and guidelines. Like, I've got individuals I know who have been living without stoves and ovens and fridges for a month or so now. And at the end of the day, there's not much they can do until their landlord fixes that. Because if they withhold rent, they will be evicted, and they have a right. The precedent is there that they will be evicted, right? That's if you withhold your rent, you can't be evicted. So I think it's a tricky subject unless you're going to get, a building inspector who's going to go in, pro bono and kind of give us all this data. It's a fine balance, because you're also going to find majority of tenants aren't going to acknowledge a lot of their issues that they face, because they don't want to cause any conflict with their landlord, because they will have nowhere to go.
Yeah, great point. I'm sure you've got some comments here.
Who, me?
Yep.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I appreciate where that's coming from, but that's not the role of a chief building official or a building inspector. I mean, their role is more for minimum maintenance standards. If they're not, their role isn't to go in and justify rents for properties. And I don't really know who would do that, but wouldn't be I mean, we do have property standards, if we were going down that route, but I don't know. Lindsay, do you have who, or Lorraine? Because I just wanted to make note that that's not our building official's role.
Well, Lindsay has her hand up. Go ahead, Lindsay.
One thing I wanted to suggest was last week we voted on requesting a certain budget allotment. And I think there's a lot of justification to request that council create a budget for a bylaw standards officer. The position would be 1%, maybe 0.5% of our budget to employ possibly 2 people. And it could be an avenue in which the town uses as, start here and maybe transition into a role as a building inspector. It could be a growth path role too. It could be a role that's created for those in school who are trying to become a building inspector as well. And I think we need to just have more boots on the ground, similar to the officers or bylaw officers who give up parking tickets. It's the same thing. Give out a ticket. I mean, we have to create the framework as to what are our standards. And really, we don't have any in Smiths Falls. Lorraine and I had a discussion this week about even just building design. There's really no standards in Smiths Falls. I could make a building neon green if I wanted to. I won't. But I think we need to put in some time and money into creating a streetscape plan and a property standards plan for us to then use. And it will go towards us having some authority of at least notifying property owners, hey, your siding's hanging off the wall and we can see the drywall. We'd like that fixed. Doesn't give us the authority to go in. But at minimum, I think it would be a great foot forward. And there's so many platforms already published and available in every city about property standards. It wouldn't take much to create our own. Copy and paste. I think it's an important first step. It doesn't allow us to go in, but it is a really good first step in creating a benchmark. Right now, we don't have one. And let's create one. And right now we're at 0. And even if we got to 1 or 2, we'd be doing a lot better. Because, some of the streets are really rough when it comes to the houses. And I've been on properties this past week and speaking with tenants, it's just like, geez, I might order extra siding on one project and just re-side a house while we're siding another project because it's so bad. So I think we could recommend to council, a really good first step would be, we want to create a property standards bylaw and give us 0.5% of the budget to do this and employ 2 student co-op officers, bylaw officers to do this, or 1 full-time person. But I think having that authority figure placed in town at minimum will show we aren't just going to talk about this, we mean it. It's 1 person, but it will go a long way.
So Lorraine, before I go to you, Carrie, can you speak to, 1, our current and plan for by law enforcement, I
Yep.
guess. And secondly, the property standards, I guess redevelopment of property standards by law.
Sure. So we do have, so recently, I don't know if I apprised the group of kind of what's transpired in the last month and a half or month. We did have a contract by law enforcement services with 360. They went into receivership. So we had to pivot overnight, literally. So we did have one by law enforcement officer, and because of the 2-hour parking downtown, they were pretty much dedicated for a couple weeks or 3 weeks to the downtown for parking enforcement. Since that time, we have brought on just a part-time person who's going around doing parking, and that is freeing up the other officer to do some property standards, animal control, dumping, all of the other bylaws that we enforce. For the 2022 budget, I am looking at bringing bylaw in-house. I'm looking at having 2 full-time officers. The rationale for bringing it in-house is I think we have exhausted any contracts in this area. We've had the commissionaires do it. We've had Frontenac, we've had 360. I don't really know of any more bylaw enforcement agencies. We just went to RFP less than a year ago and only had 2 submissions, one from 360, which isn't an option anymore, and one from Frontenac, who was our previous supplier. So looking to bring that in-house with 2 full-time, which would definitely assist being able to do more property standards, because we're going to have one who's pretty much dedicated to parking. And as well, the property standards bylaw, looking at refreshing that. So we had talked a while ago about refreshing that. And since that time, I've met with Linda Tranter, who gave me some great tips, not so much on the content, but more on enforcement and how enforcement's dealt with. And council had a great discussion a couple weeks ago about a specific property, but some really good discussion ensued about landscaping and things that council would like to see in a revised property standards bylaw. So it's the bylaw piece is moving faster than the property standards piece, but both are being worked on, and the hope is that in the 2022 budget that council will concur with having 2 full-time staff as bylaw enforcement officers.
Okay. Lorraine, you were next.
Yeah, it's been a while since we were talking about what I'm going to say, but I'm familiar with the unfairness of the rents in our community lately. I mean, my father and his wife have 2 small apartments in a beautiful home on a beautiful street that they used to rent for $400, 2 bedrooms. They're each 2 bedrooms. And everyone around them, when they've bought property lately, they're charging like $2,400, $1,400, $1,800. There's this extremely wide gap between the same kind of accommodation in terms of price, but it's also difficult because we have people that have come to me and chatted with me about buying an older building to renovate, and they're caught in, they have to, like, the rent that you buy a house at, that if you leave it alone, you can't raise it, right? That's my understanding. Now, I could be wrong, Carrie, you can correct me, but the landlord has to do some kind of improvement to justify the raising of the rent. But our rents have gone up so dramatically that it's really difficult for that whole thing. So that it's not just a little issue, it's becoming, a big one.
Well, and part of the challenge we have to apply, and between 1996 and 2016, I think there were about 35 new rental units in Smith Falls. And between last year, this year, and next year, we're probably going to have more than 10 times that number come into supply. So I mean, the increase in supply help take some pressure off. It may not make things a lot more, the new buildings obviously are not going to be more affordable, but hopefully with more inventory, landlords are having a harder time at that point finding tenants, will then start to lower rents or improve their units in order to attract tenants. But it all depends how much growth we have and where that demand is as well. Who had their hand up? No, it was Lindsay or Vicky, whichever one he wants to go first.
Just one thing on what Carrie, so I think that's great. I didn't know about some of these updates, so super happy to hear about some of the transition. I personally think bringing things in-house is always the best way to go about it too. I mean, you're creating local employment at that point as well. The only thing I was maybe going to suggest is I've been privy to seeing in the city of Ottawa, when someone gets a notice about a property standards issue and they don't address it, there's normally 3 notices that get sent out. And then when they don't, they're given a time to fix it. And if they don't, the city of Ottawa will actually go do it. And then they'll add it to their tax bill. So I'm going to find, because I was privy to a situation last year on something like that. And, you know, it's pretty impactful. And I think one of the things right now is there's not a lot of ability to convince a landlord to do a whole lot unless you take those avenues. And they're pretty effective once you take an avenue like that, such as, well, we're going to charge you and it's going to go in your tax bill. And thank you very much. Yeah, sorry, go ahead on. I think you raised your hand there, Carrie.
No, Lindsay, you're bang on, because we have a lot of landlords who have, tenants in their buildings, and will contact the landlord and say, all this stuff needs to be cleaned up around your house. And he'll say, well, it's the tenants. And as soon as we say, well, you're the property owner, so the order will be put against you. And if it's not adhered to, or if it's not done, then it will be done and put on your property taxes. That you're bang on. That's usually what gets some action.
Yeah, and by probably bringing on more officers to kind of be hands-on with identifying properties, it's very effective. And I think at minimum too, like it always goes to whoever the owner is, because often I think right now people don't live full-time in Smiths Falls that own these properties. It does go to the registered corporate address or their personal address that's listed on the ownership. So it does give that direct communication to them versus just a notice in a mailbox that they probably don't check every 2 years. So I think, I just think, it's great to hear that the work that's being done already that Carrie mentioned. And I would just say the more resources that go towards things like the bylaw officers and property standards and people like that who can actually create some good impact, I think the better. So I think the council should be making a considerate effort to ensure we at least have 2 full-time people. There's over 30,000, I think, homes in the area or something like that, or residents. Like, we should have a good number of people to be constantly monitoring the streets, because at the end of the day, council should want a beautiful town, and that is reflected in how people maintain their properties.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I think council does want a beautiful town. And part of the challenge, I think, in all these situations is when it comes down to budget, is budgeting, is balancing the things we'd love to see and the things we'd love to do with what we believe is a fair tax for our residents and taxpayers. And I know we had a brief discussion on that Monday, and of course, something coming up in November when we have a broader budget discussion. And there's a lot of things we'd love to do, and it's a matter of how we can do it and what we can do within the money that we have. The council agrees is suitable. Vicky?
I'll try to keep it brief. Basically, my story from how I got to Smiths Falls is not quite the nice one. 4 or 5 years ago, I ended up having property standards issues inside, where I called bylaw and got them to come inside the house. They got fire department involved, and they deemed the house, it was unsuitable to live in. So we had to leave. We had no choice, and we sullied our landlord, of course, by doing this, because what had happened is my child had fallen through hardwood flooring, and there was no subflooring below it. So it fell right to the basement. Not safe. So long story short, we ended up in a bachelor for 5 days. In that 5 days, I thank God found Cornerstone Landing, and they ended up finding us accommodations in Smiths Falls, because in that time, like between the time my daughter had fallen through the floor, I had been searching like all over the internet for places for us to rent, and we could not find anything in Carleton Place that was affordable. I've been born and raised there. My mother has a business there. Like I could go on, you know, I love Carleton Place, but of course I had no choice. I was priced out of my town. So then I moved to Smiths Falls. Of course, mental health issues came into play, and I got those taken care of, thank God. And now I'm able to give back. And that's where I am now, is trying to help prevent what happened to me from other people. And there's already people in tents and campers, families, children. And it's cold at night. It's not even a matter of winter's coming. It's already cold. You know, so I can't preach it enough. We do need rent subsidies. We need to look at any avenues possible for this. And if there's any more examples needed, I'm happy to call whoever. I'm happy to go in, canvass the area as appropriate, COVID safe as I can. I'll do anything to prove that this is a dang necessity. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Joanne?
Sorry, I hadn't unmuted myself. I totally agree with Lindsay that we need to, and that's why I brought it up, is we need property standards, and that will also help to, I think it'll help with getting a more stable rent in Smith Falls, because there are too many people that are just jumping on the bandwagon, you know, like, hey, we can have like $1,500 because we have a 2-bedroom available. Well, it may be available, but it may not be worth the money that you're requesting for rent. So I think if we had property standards and a little bit more guidelines, that it would improve the rents in Smith Falls.
And so our property standards today is complaint driven. And so if someone does contact the town saying they're concerned about their unit, or they observe something at a neighbor's place, that's where the action tends to come from. And what sounds like from Lindsay and Joanne, that if council does follow through with having greater resources for property standards and bylaw enforcement, then do we consider a more proactive approach? Again, that's proactive, maybe what we see on the outside of a building, we can't see inside someone's unit unless we've been invited in, of course.
I think though, but we have an example of what Vicki just said, is that when people do complain and when building inspectors, then it becomes a condemned. But if you, and you know, I think if you see a building that is in really poor shape outside, it's for sure that inside it's not that good. And yes, there are some tenants that are not very good tenants. And, but I think that if, as a town, you took a stand that we have standards, and this is what we want to start having, is these standards, that it may raise some awareness and more, you know, like, I don't know, it would take away some of the people that are afraid that if they complain that they're going to be evicted or they won't have a home. A lot of people are in that position in Smith Falls. If they complain, where am I going to go? There's nothing available. So, you know, I'd rather stay in a dump and at least have a home than nowhere, right?
And we hear that and we see that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We really deviated away from 2022 budget, and I think we're having a great discussion, but at some point in time, I think we're going to have some action here to address the rest of the agenda, and we need to make some, well, I'd like to make some kind of determination regarding a 2022 budget request. But I'm going to go back to Lindsay and then Vicki.
Yeah, quickly, just to add on, just things to consider and Carrie maybe to take notes of too. when it comes to such as if a property is deemed unlivable, I mean, and the people should not be living in there, there should be some sort of policy around the landlord being responsible for replacement cost until they can move back into the unit. So the tenant may need to leave, but reserves the right to move back in, and perhaps that's a conversation with Linda as well. But I'm pretty sure that's a right that they'd be able to go back in.
Yeah.
Just on the property stand, I mean, we don't. There's never a right to enter unless the police have been called. I'm pretty sure, or the fire department or paramedics. And so the officers would never be able to make an assumption based off the outside appearance. But I do think, again, information and knowledge is important, and also deterrent. If the town of Smith Falls starts advertising that there's going to be high standards, keep your lawns clean, bring your garbage cans back in, and you actively advertise it, well, perhaps you'll make an impact on deterring the slumlords from buying in the town that come from Ottawa, that come from other towns. And it does work. There's various places in Ottawa where a lot of landlords won't buy because the community residences are just on top of them about property standards. So I think it's worth considering what would be a deterrent or what can deter those you don't want buying rental properties in town, and basically just proactively communicating that there are standards coming in, that there's going to be protocols followed, and perhaps just letting people know you're just not going to get away with it anymore.
Thanks, Lindsay. And to that point, if a tenant is being evicted for renovations, and we see it all too frequently, there is a formal process. The landlord has to file N13 with the landlord tenant board, get a ruling from the board. If a person is evicted for renovations, they have to be permitted back in, basically the same rent they were paying before. But practically speaking, they need a place to go. And whether that's for 3 months, 6 months, or a year, generally they end up having to move on and may not know the rights. But that's where landlord really plays a big role. Vicki?
Yeah, so I think the problem with people, the town depending on people complaining against their neighbors to clean up is it sets a bad case of not in my backyard. It sets a bad case of bad neighbors. It can also set a case of, well, if I keep on the neighbor's good side, I can get away with whatever the hell I want. Who's going to call? And then there's the interpretation of the bylaws comes into effect. So some bylaw officers interpret the bylaws differently than other bylaw officers, and especially residents. I can speak on that from experience. So it becomes a whole mess. There needs to be a cut and dry process, and it can't just be up to the residents to complain. Absolutely.
Jeff?
Just thinking about this agenda item and the 2022 budget. I loved in the last meeting how we discussed that the town council could be vetted to see if they wanted to invest in affordable housing in some way. And I think that with that meeting coming, I think you said November 22nd, Mayor,
Yes.
I still think some strong recommendation from this committee to have council set aside a certain amount of money for affordable housing each year is a laudable goal. And I would love to steer us back into what could we ask for this year that would be palatable. I don't think we want to ask for the moon, but we should be asking for something to set that precedent.
Thank you, Jeff. Comments or thoughts? I mean, as I mentioned earlier, practically speaking, we're looking at maybe 4 to 6 months probably of a CIP gaining traction in the community and funding to support that. To Carl's point, a tax abatement program or a reduction in property taxes for affordable housing is probably one of the most meaningful mechanisms through affordable housing CIP. And that is not really, there's no real direct budget impact, more a matter of it's a revenue impact once the project is complete. So it's the other elements, if we of a CIP, affordable housing CIP, that could require dollars, and those would be waiver of planning fees. And Carl, if you're still there, perhaps you can add some clarity here. Waiver of planning fees, waiver of minor variance fees, waiver of building permit fees, as well as financial incentives that could include the money towards the addition of a secondary unit. Now, to my understanding, we had discussion on this Monday, but Perth has had, I believe, a financial incentive for secondary units have not had very little or no interest. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't have it here if it's voted well, but from a, Carl, can you add some clarity there as to the elements of affordable housing CIP that would have a direct budgetary impact?
Yes, I think my understanding of Perth's is they had a reserve set aside to fund and directly contribute to certain projects, and there's been limited uptake because the way the program was defined wasn't useful, I guess, to those who may have otherwise have been applying for it. And this is just from what I've understood. But yes, so that would be an area where the municipality can set aside money, and if somebody is undertaking accessibility enhancements or creating a secondary unit, and we can condition affordability as part of that, then we can contribute to the costs of that. So I think part of the process, and the nice thing about where we're at is there's been some other municipalities have had some experience in terms of what works, what doesn't work, and ultimately when we develop that policy, we want to find out where are we going to get our best bang for our buck? Where are we going to be able to target municipal resources as best as possible? And maybe the answer is contributing a larger amount of money to a smaller number of projects, or perhaps vice versa. So that would be where there is a direct budgetary impact. If it's something like a tax abatement or something else, then that would be administered a little bit differently. But ultimately, that these are conversations that are going to happen as we work through the plan and develop the policies and consult with stakeholders and those who would actually be potentially making use of it.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. So it's hard to quantify a number because there's so many variables and uncertainties at this point. So I don't know if we want to have a number, or we simply want a recommendation, a general statement to council that it carefully consider and commit to a suitable allotment, suitable budget amount towards affordable housing, the affordable housing CIP for the 2022 budget, and leave it up to council to come up with what it believes is a fair number. And as we move ahead, we may be able to quantify that a little bit better, but it's difficult to quantify that today. Thoughts? Vicki?
I think that's a good idea, considering what they did with the last CIP funding. They got more money, so maybe we'll have the same luck.
Thank you. Others? So, Carrie, do we need should we actually have a motion?
I don't think so, Sean. I mean, we have the motion from the last meeting, and I think I don't think it was lost on council that they need to, that the request is there. I just don't think they were prepared for it to be kind of an addition to the agenda. So I think I don't think we need a resolution. I think the resolution that was passed the last time still stands. I just don't think council was kind of prepared to discuss it on Monday night.
Yeah, so I guess it's still, we'll have to have discussions on what a number may be. And I guess if the advisory committee here is comfortable with us sort of carrying the ball internally, we will do that and report back once we had a chance to maybe build a framework around and ask. And Vicki, to your point earlier about some form of rent supplement or support, we will reach out to Lander County Housing to get an idea of where demand is in relationship to where the dollars are. And we'll try and develop a plan to, I mean, one of the challenges is we may not know what the real demand is, because the county's demand will be all they will have is people is requests they've actually had. We don't know how many people are struggling over and above that, or maybe never aware of it, but we need to start somewhere. But I don't know if county council has an appetite to put more money aside. But it's a discussion that we can have. Okay. So moving ahead with our agenda, we are down the last 25 minutes here. I want to talk a little bit about supportive housing, and largely, I was in a residence home a couple of weeks ago, and it was very clear, and I've seen other units that are very similar over time, but that's one that made me really think about. There are people in our community who are living independently, who would greatly benefit from having some degree of supports. So in this situation, the place was extremely unkept, hoarding, garbage, really, in my mind, quite unlivable. And that's, I'm not going to blame the occupants of the home. I think it's when there's some mental health issues which are preventing people from managing their space in a way that maybe the rest of us would. But so we've never discussed supportive housing within this forum, and so the county does have a number of beds at both Chardon Manor and Victoria House, where essentially the person who will occupy the tenant there will give up their income, which is usually ODSP or primarily ODSP, or sometimes CPP and GIS or OAS if they're over 65. They get a little bit of a living allowance of $150 a month, but they get their shelter costs and their food and medications provided. And according to the county, which I think has a combined about 35 beds here, and more, some current places again, and also in I believe the City Mills. Their, to my understanding, their demand has not been much greater than supply. It does come in from time to time, but for the most part, they usually get someone in within a few months. So I'm just wondering, when we're tackling affordable housing, the issue that goes with affordable housing for people who are living in very modest income, and primarily those on ODSP, is if there are additional supports that should be there as well. And I mentioned this to Jeff earlier today, because Cambridge Community Support is an organization that does provide greater supports than simply providing housing. And so before we go to anyone else, I just want to have Jeff provide some perspective.
Thank you, Mayor. In preparation for this, I wasn't exactly sure how to prepare. So what I've done is I put together some facts and figures about what we provided, just in case people don't fully understand. Cambridge Community Support is a multi-service agency. We're not just housing providers, although we do have 187 units of affordable housing for families, seniors, and persons with disabilities. So we partner, and I think it's really important for people to know that there's a network of supports across the county, that from agencies like Lanark County Interval House, Lanark County Mental Health. And although these agencies are not always in the housing business, they're in the support business, and they work very closely with housing providers like the county and like Cambridge. We do have a partnership with Lanark County Interval House. In fact, we have a couple of units that are second stage apartments for women fleeing abuse. So we work very closely with Aaron Lee, and we have that. We have part of our work is with seniors. Part of our work is with people with intellectual disabilities. We even have 2 group homes, one in Smith Falls and one just outside of Smith Falls, and provide 24/7 supports for those people. We have 40 units of housing in Pakenham, 5 Arches building, and it's a mixed use building where there are people that are senior, there are people that are young, that have young families that live in there as well. And I know that Lanark County Mental Health does a lot of work for people in that building. So, I don't want to go on too long about what Cambridge does. I think that the message here is that we need to be aware of what's available in our community. You mentioned a person that was a hoarder. Lanark County Mental Health has a hoarding program where they advocate and help support people that are struggling with that disorder. So it's knowing what's available, and there are networks. I was just on a 2-hour call this morning about affordable housing. The county has some consultants that are looking at the issue in Lanark County, and it will involved a lot of different agencies that were on the call. Everyone from Carolee Kilford to Ramsey at the table in Perth, myself, Kara from Connect Well in Lanark Village, the health center there. So we talk on a fairly regular basis, and we talk about having the right supports for the right people. And although that, there was talk on that call about the need for more supportive housing. So it's kind of a patchwork thing where social services across the county get together and do their best to make sure that people are in tenancies have success. And if they need some of these supports, we certainly get together. United Way East Ontario has a group called the Successful Aging Advisory Committee, and it's all of the agencies and people that care about seniors in Lanark County. It's a large group, and they meet regularly and talk about things that they can do collaboratively as groups that support seniors. So there's no magic bullet, and it's different in different cases. We had a case most recently of a gentleman who lives at a retirement home in one of the bungalows. And we have a grocery delivery program that was delivering groceries to this gentleman. Our volunteers were recognizing that he was struggling with his mobility. He had a walker, was also a hoarder. So we get in touch with the housing provider in that situation, and they intervene, and they're made aware of what Lanark County Mental Health has in terms of hoarding supports for people. So it's very much a patchwork quilt, and the longer you're in it, the easier it is to know who to call. But I wouldn't suggest that people in the public are fully versed in, mom's struggling with her tenancy. I don't know who to turn to. And I think that's an issue of education and something that we should be looking at. But in terms of, you have to look at what the mandate of this group is and what we're trying to do. I think in a broad sense, we have to recognize that. Here's an example. We're hopefully going to be providing 28 units of housing in Smith Falls. We're still waiting to hear from CMHC, and we're going ahead come hell or high water. And we're hoping, we should have heard by now, and the election got in the way. So hopefully we'll be hearing soon. But we recognize that the chances are the 28 tenancies that are going to happen in that building, there'll probably be a need for lots of support. And that's why we have a strong connection with Lanark County Mental Health, have a strong connection with Lanark County Interval House and other agencies across the county. So there's a lot of collaboration that happens behind the scenes that people may not be aware of. But the days of providing a roof over someone's head and say, good luck with that, are gone. It won't work. You end up with landlord-tenant issues. You end up with all kinds of tenant disputes between tenants. We have to be prepared to intervene in a meaningful way with the kind of support that people need. Go to where they are and help them with what they need.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And I noticed, unfortunately, Kathy from RCHS, Real Community Health Services, isn't able to be here today, but I did speak to a community support worker from there earlier today. And really back to your comments, Jeff, that there are ample supports in the community if people can get connected to them. And the community support workers that are through our CHS tend to be that intermediary role where if they have someone who needs additional services, they can connect them to the services they need. So, so from a supportive housing standpoint, I'm certainly open to any other anyone else wants to have a comment on it. But I wanted to add it to the agenda just as a discussion point to see if there's something that we need to delve deeply into. But my sentiment, based on what Jeff has said and I've heard earlier today, and the feedback we received from the county is that I believe for the most part, the current environment supports the needs. And secondly, not everybody would be suitable for a congregate setting either. And some people would have difficulty living in an environment where they're maybe shared a room with somebody or certainly sharing common space. So unless there's anything further with this, I think we've had our discussion on this, we can move on. And we've got two more items in the agenda to discuss. Updated recommendation listing, back to Carrie.
This is just a very quick item, Sean. I sent out the updated recommendation listing. Sorry, I'd like to say I'm in Mexico, but the sun's coming in very brightly. So I sent it out yesterday just to give everybody a feel of kind of what we've accomplished so far. And I was kind of taken aback a bit when I was updating it and how much has been accomplished in a short amount of time. So I've sent that out to everybody. So that's the cheat sheet that Jeff recommended at the beginning of our committee meetings. And so it's obviously being expanded because as we discuss subjects and we're taking things off the list, I update it. So I've sent it out. If everybody wants to review it, if I've missed something, let me know. But I think I've captured everything. Updated the legal clinic one that Vicky and Courtney did. And so that's been updated. I didn't take it off as being concluded because there could be an opportunity to host something else or take part in something else. So you'll see in there too about the affordable housing CIP. I've updated it with the discussion that was had at committee of the whole and the pre-budget approval that was granted for $50,000 to go for a request for proposal. So just to have a peek and let me know if I've missed something or if something needs to be amended, but I'm trying to keep that current so that we all know what we've accomplished to date.
Thank you. Jeff, you have a comment?
Yeah, I would just say that this is really good work, and we're probably out in front of the 9 communities across Lanark, and with the county entertaining a housing group with this consultant company, SHS, it would be wise for us to share it with that consultant, so that because one of the topics this morning on that call was how bylaws differ depending on where you are in those 9 communities. Towns like Tay Valley are taking a real leap ahead in some ways around tiny homes, and they actually received a seniors secretariat grant to look at co-housing and how that could be implemented in Tay Valley. And we need to be learning from each other. And I think there's lessons that we're learning here that should be shared with those other communities, at least with the consultant of the county's study. So I think that it makes a lot of sense to share.
Yeah. Carrie, did you have something to add?
Just what Jeff was saying. So Jeff, Carl and I took part in one of the sessions yesterday with that. So we have been involved with the county in that process as well. And I was there for about half the meeting. Carl was able to stay for the whole thing. But we were in the consultation session yesterday and they were talking about accessory dwellings and things of that nature. So Smiths Falls does have a seat at that table. So we'll keep everybody updated on that as well.
Great.
Courtney, did you have your hand up? No? Okay. I saw it there. Okay, anything further here? If not, we'll move on to Carl, the OPA ZBLA for additional units.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think this was slated to be a topic for discussion at the last meeting. Unfortunately, that meeting did not proceed. I guess the quick question, has everyone had been provided a copy of the draft official plan and zoning provision related to additional residential units?
Is that the one, Carl, you just sent me before the meeting?
I'm not sure if it had gone out
No.
earlier.
Nope, it has not.
Okay. So I can summarize, but we can certainly we do have a public meeting scheduled for that in November. So I don't think we have some time yet to provide comments on the proposed policy. But just to summarize, our zoning bylaw consultants, as directed, have prepared draft policies for the official plan and zoning bylaw to accommodate additional residential units, so to allow them in more circumstances than just single family homes, and also as detached coach house type situations in backyards. So they have proposed amendments to our official plan, but those amendments are very, it's largely just some text and terminology updates, calling them an additional residential units rather than second units. That's what the Planning Act refers to presently, and then also creating the authorizing policy, allowing us to
Well, the same, Lorraine's got to step up for me.
okay. And then creating the authorizing policy to actually allow additional residential units as required in the Planning Act in more situations. So I think that's there. I don't think there's, I think the real meat and potatoes of the draft zoning is in the or of the draft policy is in the zoning bylaw. So I'll quickly summarize what's in there, and perhaps if the committee wanted to have a look at it over the next little while before the next meeting, and then we can double back and provide some more formal comments if you'd like to. But the proposed zoning change does accommodate a number of items. On the one hand, we've created some definitions, or our consultants have proposed some definitions. So defining additional residential unit, defining some of the walls and some of the other building forms that are all part of that. Definitions, of course, are important because that sets the groundwork to explain what exactly it is that we're regulating. But the proposed changes are to the general provisions of the zoning bylaws. We are proposing additional residential units within single detached dwellings, and also in semi-detached row house and townhouse dwellings. So a maximum of one additional residential unit would also be permitted as in a detached situation. So the bylaw is not proposing a minimum dwelling size. It's just however small the building. The unit would be required to obtain a building code, of course, or a building permit. So we don't, and I think that's consistent with what we've seen in a lot of policies and other municipalities that are doing this. We're doing away with the minimum dwelling size requirements that we've often had for accessory apartments. So this would remove it altogether. So depending on a number of factors, the additional residential unit could be as small as 200 or 300 square feet, but it doesn't have to be that small. But it requires a building permit. It's only permitted where adequate public or private water, sanitary, sewer services are available. That's verified by the Public Works Department at building permit stage. And then additionally, if this is a backyard home, if it's a sort of a detached unit, then it would also be subject to the minimum the minimum side yard setbacks for the for any other building in the zone. So that's to establish a little bit of privacy. It can go within the required rear yard. So our zoning bylaw in most zones requires a 26-foot backyard. In this case, if somebody were to be building a coach house or an attached or a detached additional residential unit, it would be able to go as close as 10 feet back, so long as there's no windows on that side. So the additional residential unit it cannot exceed 40% of the gross floor area of the main building. There's a number of other policies in there just to sort of confirm that it is really and truly ancillary and secondary to the main use, but more broadly, just so that it does to best fit within the existing neighborhood, but also to allow the use in a lot of places. So I know we are running out of time. I did just get a reminder that we have a couple of items left on the agenda. So I think I'll leave this with you for today, but perhaps we can double back at the next meeting and discuss in further detail if there's anything that you'd like to clarify or maybe go over in a little more detail or provide some feedback to our consultants. I'll just emphasize for the group here that this is not final. This is a proposal that's been prepared by our consultants in consultation with staff, but there is a public process. Council will be asked to weigh in before ultimately making a decision on it. So I think any feedback from the Housing Committee would be very helpful between now and the public meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Carl. And we can circulate the public meeting dates, and perhaps we'll move this up on the agenda, the next meeting and the meeting after, once you have a chance to digest the information you sent. So we're running short on time here. I just want to touch briefly on the standing item, inclusive housing, just to advise the committee of the whole did support the task force, the advisory committee's recommendation to encourage a province to make changes to the interior building code to create or mandate more inclusive and accessible housing. And that will be coming to council for endorsement probably next week. And finally, we've got draws as a result of our tenant workshop. Thanks, Vicki and Courtney, for all the work you did to make that happen. And I think you should be comforted somewhat by knowing that thanks to your efforts and Linda's guidance, I'm sure we have people in our community, even beyond our community, who are staying housed because they are able to get the help that they may not otherwise have got. So we've got some draws, so I'll turn it over to you two. We've got things up.
So I've, excuse me, I've already got all the names in this little thing here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 gift cards to give away. There are 3 independent ones. There are 2 $50 ones. There's a $100 one. There's 3 Giant Tiger ones, 2 $50 and 1 $20. And there's a Boston Pizza one for $50. So I'll just kind of go down the line.
Thank you to everyone who donated the gift cards, including Cambridge Community Support, Jeff. Okay, so Courtney, start pulling names, and I guess Vicki, you're curious, please write it down.
Okay, this one will be for the $100 independent, and the winner is R. Hamilton.
Thank you.
Do the one for $50 independent. The winner is Jennifer Cromie. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Okay, Jennifer.
Okay. The third independent one, which is another 50, goes to Dawn Robertson.
We all remember Dawn?
Yep. The fourth one is a Giant Tiger 50. Caroline Senior.
Thank you.
I'll do the second $50 Giant Tiger. Julie Wilbond.
Right.
$20 giant tiger. Cheryl Batten.
Okay.
And then we have the last one, which is $50 Boston Pizza gift card. Ashley DeLong.
All right. So Courtney, perhaps you can send to Carrie the names and the gift cards.
Yep,
Okay, we'll leave.
that's been worked out.
To figure that out.
Yep.
Okay,
I'll-
thanks everyone. We haven't set a meeting date. We will follow up and schedule a meeting within the next 4 weeks with a call to the chair. Okay, everybody, thanks for your time today. We need to get off so the accessibility advisory committee can utilize our Zoom service.